Mem Ches. Sorry?
Yeah, we're recording.
You started from the Barakas. Okay. Turn up volume.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Yossi. Les, can you hear everything? It's all going. I'm talking to Les on the Zoom. Everything coming through okay? We'll have a little one. Thank you. So it's 47, sorry, 48A, line number 5. 48A, line number 5.
Thanks. Stevie.
Amar Shmuel Mishtachavele Ilan. Not coming through. Mine is, I'm taking
Thank you. You see, help yourself.
No, thank you.
I recommend it.
What is the Wi-Fi? No, the Wi-Fi is not good yet. You are logging through the Wi-Fi. Thank you. Yeah, I'm in.
Everybody ready?
Put
Amar Shmuel Mishtachavele Ilan.
up your sound issue. Put everything low, and I can hear myself.
Try to mute all the participants, mute all. And sound off so I don't come through on the other computers.
You're still coming through.
Yeah. So put your sound on
But
lowest.
then mute everybody.
I mute, but for me, but my mute only helps you. In other words, my sound will come through on your machine if your volume is up. Mute only means that the computer's not
Yeah,
going to
but
transmit
I-
your voice out.
Yeah.
But whoever you're listening to will come through because
Top
the
left
computer
corner,
doesn't.
on this one you can join without audio. No audio.
I think there is.
No,
Oh, one second.
That's disconnected.
Let's disconnect it now. Okay. Shkoyach. Shkoyach. So we're getting ready to roll.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, we should dedicate our learning tonight to the rabbi that was killed in Abu Dhabi in Dubai.
Okay.
What was the Hebrew name? Reb Tzvi HaKohen ben. Sure, let's see if I've got it. Right, they're in the middle of the funeral now. It started at 8 o'clock in Kfar Chabad, and they're going from there to Har HaZeitim.
Did you know him,
I didn't know him. Kogan. In fact, his wife is a niece. HaKohen, Reb Tzvi HaKohen Kogan. Let me just see if there's
He came from Moldova.
he comes from a Moldovan family, and let's just see.
His uncle, his
wife's uncle was the fellow that was murdered in Mumbai in 2008, Gabriel Holzberg.
Crazy.
His wife?
His wife's mother's brother.
But I also
His wife's mother was Holzberg. That was her maiden name. Now her surname is Spielman, but she was a Holzberg. Her brother was the Rabbi Gabriel Holzberg that was murdered in the Chabad in Mumbai in 2008. I'm looking to see if it has Kogan.
It's managerial skills. Division of labor.
I'm not sure his father's name.
And I also read that they didn't arrest them in the United Arab Emirates. They got them from a country outside.
From Oman.
Was it Oman?
Is that where it came?
Yeah.
But it's amazing that they release them to the.
So they demanded extradition though. They won't play with UAE, I don't think.
Sorry?
I don't think anybody will play with UAE in that area.
Well, it depends.
Oman.
Yeah.
No, if it was.
They found them in Oman.
Yeah. Well, that's the northern part of the China. Another, whatever. the western side, and the other one is the Houthis. It's Yemen.
Yemen.
What's the bell down there?
Now it'll become Hashem.
I'm just asking somebody for his father's name.
Strategic block.
Serbian.
Kelly heeft nou gekomen.
No. No, the northern one.
He sorted on.
Jamison, please.
If he can pass the Jamison.
Jamison whiskey.
Jamison is the whiskey.
There it is.
Which?
No. James.
I can't stand the Irish.
It's something crazy as well. There was two 60-year-olds got brisket in Ukraine today.
Ready?
Yeah, I just
What
seen that one
happened
took
in
on the name
Ukraine?
Pete.
Two
60-year-old men
were
were
killed.
breast today. No, breast today. In the
Breast
Ukraine.
in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And the ones took his name, which just came through now.
In honor of.
Yeah, the one took his name.
Okay, let's go.
So we go for it. We'll have his name in mind in our learning, in our studies. And please God, I mean, Hashem should.
You need his name.
Yeah. I wanted the name of the father. I've got his name is Tzvi HaKohen. I was interested in finding out the father's name. You know, when you learn Mishnayos, you normally do the neshama and the name of the father, but I'm not sure. I put on a forum of rabbis. Maybe they'll answer me while we're busy learning with his father's name.
Did you get a flight?
Huh?
You get a flight for Brussels?
Wow.
Mike's just invited us to the first second. When he wants to leave, we can go now.
Catch a late night flight. Okay, so basically, we are going to carry on with the same Gemora, gentlemen. Let's get us some learning done. And our learning should be a schus for his neshama, for the soldiers, for the leaders, and for all the good people in the world, in Am Yisrael, and the whichever ones are our friends.
Rabbi, can you say something about my daughter that had an appendix out?
I really, okay. L'chaim for her health. You should, because when was it done today?
For what?
You thought I had an appendix operation.
What?
Poor Sholem.
Tomorrow, Michael Glassman having a brew.
Sorry.
And oh, yeah, on a happier note, Michael's grandson's, all the grandson is his, Michael's grandson's breast. Les is online here. Les will convey mazel tov on our behalf. Les, I'm sure you're going to be at the bris tomorrow, so you'll convey mazel tov to Mike and Ariella and to Chani and her family on the bris. And please God, only simchas for the Yidden. Only from now on, only happy stuff. Yeah, good and happy stuff. So we're continuing with the same Gemara we were busy with, but there's just one little new angle that's going to come up. And what is it now? 901. If we stay on track, we can maybe even finish this Gemara so we don't have to come back to it.
I doubt it.
Huh? Steve, how much are you betting? So some of these lines you'll be familiar with. We started reading them last week, but then we didn't continue. Amar Shmuel Amishtachav Ilan Tisafte Asura. So the Gemara quoted a saying, a statement from Shmuel, the sage Shmuel, that if somebody bowed down to a tree, its additional growth that grows after he has worshipped it is prohibited. So it would seem that everything that happened until then is okay, and what happened after is prohibited. And on this, a question was posed, and the question was by Rabbi Elazar, massive Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar asked a question and said, we just read in a Mishnah something that sounded a bit different, that if a person lopped and trimmed a tree for the purpose of, inaugurating or initiating the tree for Avodah Zarah, and then the tree grew an additional piece, what you have to do, you'll be familiar because we've said it many times, noitel masha hechlif, you take off that which has been added as a result of that trimming or lopping, which would mean
Whose phone is on?
that Gideo Pisloi in only if he pruned it and he lopped it, Loi Gideo Pisloi Loi, if he didn't prune it or lop it, then it would not be a problem of Avodah Zarah. And I just want to unpack that a little bit. There's certain times where you often have this in the Rambam, where a certain terminology that's used is, for instance, in Maimonides, in Halacha, the Rambam will talk about lav she'ein boi maisa, which means a prohibition that lacks an actual action. Like sometimes, for instance, somebody can do something wrong or transgress, and in most cases, the transgression or the matter at hand is because of an action that's been done. An action means that something's been done in a direct and active kind of way. And sometimes you can have a prohibition that's done without an action. Maybe the person opened their mouth and made a designation, but maybe there was no action. Like, for example, recently in the Rambam, in the laws of Gemora, of exchanging, if a person says, I'm going to exchange a holy animal, a sacred animal, for an animal that's not sacred, that particular swap is not an action. He didn't do anything. You know, all of those sayings where we say, I think one of the whiskeys in the old days was called doers. And people used to say this, doers. Doers like D-E-W-A-R-S, that's right. But some people used to say there are doers and sayers. Some people do and some only say. And what the Gemora is dealing with over here was it wants to say that a mere verbal expression where a person prays to this particular tree or whatever the Avodah Zarah is not classed the same way as an actual action. Like when a person starts to make a mark of some sort on that tree, lops it or trims it or does something to it, it's very different if all he's doing is praying to it. And this is what the Gemora is dealing with in this piece. Does that have the same effect? Because from the impression we get from the Tana, that means the author of the original Mishnah, is the problem is more when the person does something. He arrives at the tree and he knocks a branch off, he trims something, with his hands he makes a physical action, which shows that something is being done. But in Shmuel's statement, nothing was actually done. A tree was planted, not for Avodah Zarah, and somebody bowed down to it, somebody served it. And why would Shmuel say that that's a problem when we see in the Mishnah that it appears that there must be an action? So the Gemara explains that there actually was a machloikas, a difference of opinion. We started this, but we didn't finish it. There was a difference of opinion between the rabbis and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. And their difference of opinion involved a tree that was planted initially for neutral purposes, and later on somebody served it with Avodah Zarah. And Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda was stricter in that machlokes, in that argument. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda said that he doesn't matter that originally the tree was not planted for a bad purpose to worship it. The fact is that subsequently it was worshipped, and that's enough. Retrospectively, that puzzles that it would seem that would prohibit the entire tree. And the rabbis, the Rabbanon, were of the opinion that no, if the tree was initially planted neutrally and only later served, you should be able to salvage something. So, reading it inside Omalach Shmuel, Shmuel would tell you, Mani, whose statement is this? Rabbanoni. It's the statement of the Rabbanon, that Mishnah that we learned, that spoke of a tree that somebody lopped or trimmed for the additional part to be utilized for Avodah Zarah is the rabbis. Or Shmuel, the Amak Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, Shmuel is of the view of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, the Amar, and he says, Ilan Shenatoyel of Asif Avade Asur, a tree that was planted and later served, is prohibited. In other words, the way that this argument, and this is what the Gemora is dealing with today, it's unpacking the argument, the debate between Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and the rabbis. And Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda seems to take a stricter approach, that whether it was initially served as Avodah Zarah, whether it was later served as Avodah Zarah, the tree is no longer okay. You can mess it up at the start, you can mess it up in the middle, it's no longer okay. And the rabbis tend to be the ones who say that we're only worried about a tree that was initially planted for Avodah Zarah. But if later on something else happened, you can sort of salvage, you can cut off the extra, as we've been saying the whole time. Then the Gemara brings Rav Ashi, Maskif lo Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi challenges this whole story. And he says, Mamai de Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda v'Rabbanon b'Tosefes Pliga. How can you assume, and this is, by the way, very typical of what Gemara can do. Imagine that it will assess a whole debate and a whole argument to figure out what the argument was. In other words, in what parameter is the argument? Mimai, on what grounds do you assume that Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda v'Rabbanon b'Tosefes Pliga, that Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and the rabbis are arguing over the additional growth on the tree subsequent to it being used for Avodah Zarah? Dilma, perhaps we can assume and say instead, Tosefes, the additional part, Ledivrei Hakol Asur, is prohibited according to everybody, over Ikare Plige, and their argument is with the trunk, or the original part of the tree. So it sounds very technical, but it can be simplified. Rav Ashi is saying that you've got two stages here. You've got the tree as it was before somebody came and turned it into Avodah Zarah. You've got the tree as it is after somebody came along and designated it for Avodah Zarah. Normally, for practical purposes, we could say there's the trunk and the initial branches, which were planted by, I call it, neutral, non-religious farmer, and then came along other people and used it for Avodah Zarah later. We know from other sources that Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and the rabbis argued with regard to whether it's prohibited or permitted to use the tree. Rav Ashi is saying, why are you pushing that argument into the new part of the tree? Let's rather say that they all agree that the new additional part of the tree is prohibited. Because when the person came along and designated the tree for Avodah Zarah, from then on the new part grew. So let's say that according to the rabbis, let's say that according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, according to both of them, the additional is prohibited. No argument there. Let me just finish the thread. Otherwise, we'll have to start it all again. And then I'll come back to you. So basically, let's say that their argument does not apply to the additional part of the tree. Let's say that the additional part that all agree is prohibited. That was for Avodah Zarah. Now, then we would have to park their argument on whether or not you could use the original part of the tree. So they're not arguing about the later stage. Somebody came along and served Avodah Zarah. The second part, the growth of the tree afterwards, they all agree is asur. Let's say, says Rav Ashi, that the actual argument is with regard to the original part of the tree. And why would they argue about the original parts? Because one, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says the original part, the trunk, is prohibited. And the Rabbanon says that it's okay. And the Gemara explains why. Coming back to Saul, what did you want to say?
So how does a person decide to designate the tree for Avodah Zarah?
But according to this, actually, that's a core question you're asking, because there are two ways that are mentioned in this Gemara, which are discussed here. One is simply by serving it, by arriving there and serving it.
So he spoils it for everybody.
He spoils it for everybody by serving it, exactly. The other method is by doing something to it in order to serve it by saying, I'm now going to fix this tree so that it is a pretty Asherah. Right now, it might be a bit ugly. It's not growing well. I'm an expert, so I'm going to lop a piece off or trim a piece off because I know from my garden or botany expertise that it's going to cause it to grow nicely that way. And when it grows nicely, what's the reason I'm doing this? So that it can be served. Back inside the Gemora, the Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Sovar, the argument would be that Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda holds Ikare nami asur. The trunk and original part of the tree is also prohibited retroactively. Why? It's how you learn something out of a pasuk, out of a verse. Watch the words of the verse carefully. Because it's written, the verse in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, which tells us about these trees, which teaches us that these trees become prohibited to have benefit from. Now, there are various different verses. The verse that Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda extracts the lesson or the halacha from is Devarim Yud Beis, is the 12th chapter of Devarim. And over there, what does it say? The phrase says, "Va'asherayim tisrafun ba'esh." The Jewish people are told before entering the land of Canaan, what should you do with their Asherah trees when you come into Canaan and you see that the nation there has Asherah trees? Burn them in fire. Destroy them with fire. You, the Jewish people, may not benefit from their Asherah trees. Says the pasuk, says the verse, "Va'asherayim tisrafun ba'esh." Burn the Asherah trees in fire. What does it mean, burn a tree in fire? It's very hard to stop the burning halfway. Burn the tree in fire basically means he's got every device. Burn the tree in fire basically means the whole tree, doesn't it? It doesn't only mean a part of the tree. It means the whole tree. Total destruction. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is learning. We'll come back to you. I just want to catch that thread. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, if the Torah is telling you that the Asherah tree has to be burnt with fire, totally destroyed, what is it telling you? That when the guy comes along and serves it later, it's not just the additional part that's a problem. That tree is a goner, the whole tree. It's condemned, and therefore it all has to be burnt. That's his view. Where Rabbanon Savra and the rabbis hold Ika Ilan Shara, the main part of the tree, the trunk, and any part of the tree that was there originally before extra growth happened is permitted for Hana. As we said, take off the part that you're not using because of Avodah Zarah, and the rest is okay. Why do the rabbis say that the main part of the tree or the original part of the tree is okay? Because they use a different verse to learn the law. What verse do they use? It's written, Devarim Zayin Hay va'asherayim tegadayun, and you will, what's tegadayun? You will cut or chop. You will chop hew down the Asherim. Yeah, you'll cut or chop the Asherah trees. What kind of tree will you get that its additional part that you can cut is prohibited, but its original part is permitted? That must be ilan shenatai, a tree that was originally planted, and subsequently served. So basically, what the Gemora has calculated over here is the opinion of the rabbis that you have a tree that was subsequently served, and therefore you learn the way they see it from the pasuk: cut the part that was served afterwards, use the part that wasn't. But Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says no. The Torah was saying burn down the tree because the entire tree is prohibited. The action that was taken in serving the tree basically stuffed up from a spiritual point of view the entire tree. And that's the argument between Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and the sages. Now, the only thing is, sorry? Can it be made hefka? No, I think it has to be either revoked or not revoked. I don't think hefka helps. Yeah, I don't think hefka helps. But just to catch the thread of the Gemara, so that we don't have to catch it, I mean, so we can pass through it. The only issue is here, the Gemara puts everything through a check, a little bit like AI or spell check or whatever you get nowadays. The Gemara always checks things against other conversations. The style or formats of Gemara is that there were many conversations which were recorded off by heart, Baal Peh. The sages had conversations and different students heard it in certain ways and recorded it. So everything is always, lahavdil, like today on the apps, they'll have what they call fact checking. Everything is always compared or fact checked. And the Gemora says, hold on a second. If we fact check this, if we turn back a few pages, and you'd actually see it if you turn back. A few pages ago, we said the opposite. We connected the rabbis with the pasuk of burning asheras, which makes it sound like you got to get rid of the whole tree. And we connected Rabbi Yehuda ben Bacher with the pasuk about hewing or just cutting the tree, which sounds more like you're only going to cut off the new parts. Now you're saying the opposite. You're connecting them each with a verse. And when I look back, I see that it's the other way down. You connected each of them with the other verse. So, and if you would say, by the way, this is not the way it was presented back over there, if we do a fact check. So the Gemara says, you can turn it around. In other words, we can verify that in fact the conversation was the other way around. Rabbanon le de Rabbi Yossi, give the rabbis Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda's pasuk, with the Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda le Rabbanon, and put his pasuk with the rabbis. You know what it's like? Just to give you a practical example. Imagine we all sitting here and having a conversation, and next week there's some other people, and somebody says that so-and-so made a statement like this, and somebody says so-and-so made a statement like that. And a person who knows them very well says, it doesn't sound right to me. He didn't say that. He did not like him to say that. And it's not like him to say that. So somebody says, hold on a second. I got this mixed up. He actually said B and he said A. Aha, now it makes sense. You know, like when you know somebody well, like political views, sports teams, where people are emphatic about something. Somebody might say that's not him. I'm not sure why you think. So you go back and you analyze the conversation and you figure out that maybe it was muddled up, that this guy said this and this guy said that. And that's the format of this Gemora. The Gemora is saying, actually what really happened over there was what you think the Rabbanon said, or whichever pasuk they used was really Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, and vice versa. But now the Gemara asks a question, Im Kain, if this is the case, that which we said in the Mishnah, our Mishnah, the author of the Mishnah. Who is the author of the Mishnah? How do we identify or give responsibility to the author of the Mishnah? The author of the Mishnah said that if somebody comes along to a tree and trims it or lops it, as a result of that, designating it to Avodah Zarah, then the additional is a problem and the original isn't. It seems hard to find either side agreeing or going along with that Mishnah. There doesn't appear to be either side of our argument. Why? Because if you want to plug in the opinion of the rabbis in that Mishnah, even if he didn't lop or trim the additional part of the tree, is anyways prohibited. In other words, the rabbis said, the rabbis would say that the additional part of the tree, even if he just bowed down to it and served it, it's prohibited. He doesn't have to actually make an action of trimming. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, if you want to say that Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, it doesn't make sense because the author of the Mishnah said that the original part of the tree is permissible, but Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda said that the original part of the tree is prohibited. In other words, the Gemara is trying to figure out who was the author of our Mishnah at the beginning. And the author of our Mishnah doesn't seem to synchronize with either of these two opinions. So then the Gemara says, and this is the end off of this particular piece before the next Mishnah, the Gemara says that the answer is that you can actually explain this Mishnah either according to the opinion of Rabbanon or according to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. I give you an example. You know what? A good attorney, a good lawyer can take either side of the case. In other words, no matter who comes to him, as long as they're paying the right price, he can argue that this guy's right and he can argue that that guy's right. That's considered good, how would you call it, a good skill. You know, some people can take a case only from one side. They're not so sure how they'd argue the other side of the case. They might say to one side, listen, you're in trouble. I can't help you. But if your buddy comes along, I'll take the case for him because I can argue his side. A very skilled attorney can take either side. As long as you pay him the price, what does he care? Now, Lahavdil, what's going on over here is the Gemora is saying we can actually run this either way. We could either say that the author of the Mishnah is the Rabbanon, based on their opinion about trees and whether you can use them or not, and we'll explain it that way. Or we could say that it's Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and explain it the other way. And the Gemara unpacks this. Should you want, you can plug in or synchronize the rabbi's opinion with the Mishnah. And if you want, you can explain the Mishnah to be Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. How do you do this? In fact, so the Gemara explains it. If you want, you can explain the Mishnah to be the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. So how do you match up an opinion that doesn't look like him? Like this. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, when Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda said that when you don't trim or lop the tree in any parts, Ikar Ilan Asur, the main part of the tree is prohibited. Bistama is with regard to a general situation. And I'll explain in a moment what that means. But he trimmed it, he lopped it, he reveals his intention, that he wants the additional, but Ikar Ilan Loi Nichalei, he doesn't want the main part of the tree. So only the additional growth is forbidden. Now, putting that in a bit simpler English, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says you can have two different scenarios. If a person comes and designates a tree as Avodah Zarah, he says, I want this tree nice tree, I'm designating it to my deity or my idol. So here is where you have a real problem. And here is where Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says the entire tree becomes Asur, even though originally it wasn't planted for Avodah Zarah. And only later, because he's basically serving the tree in its entirety, he's not designating any piece of it, a new one, an old one, a leaf, a branch. That's when Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda would say the entire tree is Asur. But if he comes along with his botanist and they start focusing on trimming branches and cutting special places, now he's showing you which part of the tree is the Avodah Zarah. Now he's designating his idol worship to a particular new part of the tree. And then Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, I will make an exception and say that the original part of the tree is okay. So even though Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda normally would say that all of the tree is not okay and the original part is not okay, if by his action of cutting and pruning and trimming, he's showing you that all he is interested in is the additional part, so then the original part could be okay. That is the Gemora skillfully weaving Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda's opinion into the Mishnah. And with the rabbis, and what would the rabbis say? The rabbis would say, according to this, it doesn't make a difference. This talks to your question, Saul. The rabbis would say, we don't care whether he bowed down to the tree or he actually pruned it and did an action on the tree. No difference between the two. Once it got worshipped, he messed up the second part, the additional part. So you could say, if that's the case, so why does the author of the Mishnah make it sound only if you trimmed it, only if you lopped it? What about the guy who bowed down and prayed to it and didn't do anything? Why would that expression be there? So the Gemara says the rabbis would explain the following. They'd say that maybe what would happen is a person might say that if there was action on the tree, and the person actually trimmed or lopped the tree or whatever, you might think that because he got so involved, so even the trunk and the rest of the tree is asur, is prohibited. Even though we normally would say that the original part of the tree is okay, maybe now we should say no, because he did such an intense change. You know, it's like you renovate something so much. He hugged it and bit it and whatever. So maybe even according to the rabbis who normally agree that the original part of the tree is okay, are now going to say, no, the original part of the tree is not okay because he did such a major job of the change that it's as if a tree was planted for Avodah Zarah retroactively, retrospectively. So the rabbis say that's why the Mishnah needed to tell you that he trimmed it and he lopped it and he did something to show you the opposite. That no, it doesn't matter what he did, according to the rabbis, whether he trimmed it and did a major change, whether he just bowed down to it and served it and did nothing whatsoever. In both cases, the rabbis have a consistent view that the original part of the tree is permitted. Reading that inside, Ibayis Aimer, the Gemora is saying, if you wish, you can explain it this way. Rabbanon, that this Mishnah is the opinion of the Rabbanon, that the original part of the tree is okay, and the words Gido Yofisloi, that he lopped it or trimmed it, are needed, are necessary to avoid a wrong assumption or a confusion. And the Gemara explains that. Sol Kadaita Chamina, in Gemara terminology, Sol Kadaita Chamina is a wrong or confusing assumption. I might have made an assumption wrong, therefore I needed an additional lesson to prevent that assumption. So Kedaita Chamina, you know, it's like putting up a sign on the road because we see that most people are veering left over there for no good reason and getting lost. So Kedaita Chamina, I might have thought I might have gone off the wrong way and gotten lost and said, given the Ovid Lamaisa Bekufay, because the person does a Maisa, he actually acts on the tree and he goes and he lops it or trims it, then Ika Ilanami Litasar. The main parts or the original parts of the tree is also prohibited from use. It becomes like a tree that was initially planted for Avodah Zarah. And even the rabbis would prohibit the trunk of such a tree, the original part of such a tree. So we specially plugged in those words into the Mishnah to tell you not to get lost and not to make that assumption. So we learn otherwise. So that brings us to the next Mishnah. So we did complete that Gemora, but just maybe because it's technical to summarize it, we're talking over here about a tree that an Asherah tree. Next Mishnah is also about an Asherah tree, but from a slightly different angle. But this is where we said that if it was initially planted for Avodah Zarah, it's prohibited. If it was initially planted for any purpose, and later on he pruned it and specially trimmed it for Avodah Zarah, the Mishnah said, take off the additional parts and the original part's okay. Then the Gemara introduced from another place an argument between the rabbis and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. And Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda was strict enough to say he doesn't care whether the tree was initially designated or later designated. Always the whole tree is out the question. And the rabbis who say that usually the original part of the tree is okay and the additional part is no good. And the Gemara basically was trying to figure out how to place these two opinions within our Mishnah. That, in a nutshell, was this sugya, this piece.
Which I disagree with. Why should a goy come along and spoil the beauty of the tree that I used to enjoy for using it for show?
Maybe it was his tree initially.
No, it was there. It was a natural tree nature. So who is he to come and change it? For himself, he can change it, but for me, it doesn't change. That's what I'm saying. I should be able to still enjoy the beauty of the tree.
But I think that applies.
Shade, whatever.
Yes, I think this applies to tree.
What it is spoiled.
But I think we're not talking.
So we cut off that piece.
I think we're talking about a tree that he can take ownership of.
Moshe a strict instruction that within the 15 years, all of what is already been removed from the plant.
I wish.
And if there was any suspect of what is already been moved.
And whatever they touch goes to the word as well.
There's a difference. Shayra is designated. The tree that you decide to use, it's not a shayra.
The people believe.
Then you cut those pieces off and it's okay.
Like a Muslim. What
I
does
don't
he
think,
believe in?
but Saul, I think
He
it had to
believed
be
he
his
got
tree.
through Allah, which is
Saul, I think it had to
And
be
he
his
had-
tree. I don't think
and
it could be any tree.
Huh?
I think it had to be his tree or a tree that he could take
But
ownership.
but the way it was originally planted for any reason, for beauty, or tree grows naturally. No one even had to plant it. And now a guy comes along and changes it. Who's he to change it for me? He can change it for himself.
Sorry? Oh no, Les is not connected. I think no, 1 second. No, Les is connected. Sorry. Les,
Has it got nothing to do with ownership?
let's try switch it on. Sorry?
Has it got nothing to do with
Les,
ownership?
Okay,
I think it does. I think it does have to.
But if
Les?
it's owned by him, he can do what he likes with it. But if it was
Why? Les, Arnie's here to say hello.
But if a guy
Are you going to the
does
place
some
tomorrow?
changes, then he says, well,
It could be it's on automatic.
I just wanted to tell him to give me regards to my son.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna make it early tonight, Rabbi.
Take care, take care. Yeah, I'm
you got
done.
it on
Thank you,
like,
Thank you for coming. Shkoya.
maybe some sugar.